Welcome to the Media Rumble. We're in conversation with Danielle Lindemann. She's a sociologist who studies gender, sexuality, the family, and culture. And we're going to be chatting about her book, What Reality TV Says About US. The book looks at the phenomenon of reality TV, how it's completely changed our idea of entertainment, how it's shaped us as a people, how it's shaped our culture in the world over. And so it's going to be a really fun conversation because I, in fact, have a lot to pick your brains on when it comes to a lot of the similarities that I see between television news in India today and reality TV. But we'll come to that in a bit. I want to first understand, what sparked your interest in reality TV as a subject? Why did you choose that? You're probably a fan.
I am a fan. I'm unabashedly a fan. I do kind of position myself as a fan in the book. I often say kind of my whole life was research for this book, or at least since I first discovered reality TV. But I also teach a class at Lehigh University on the sociology of reality TV, where we pair classic sociological readings with episodes of reality TV shows. And I find that reality TV is really this sort of great kind of primer for understanding society, because in some ways it's really just society kind of overblown, kind of dialed up the knob to 11. And so by looking at these exaggerated caricatures of us, we can come to a better understanding of ourselves. So that class that I've been teaching was kind of the germ of the idea for the book.
Oh, wow, that's fascinating. That'll be a really fun class. And that's interesting that, to your mind, reality TV is really who we are, but an exaggerated version of it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So one of the things now, I think in India, the top few entertainment shows are probably reality TV. We have one which is about Bollywood vibes, which is a Netflix series that's hugely popular, a peek into the lives of Bollywood vibes. Then we have this show called Big Boss, which is modeled on this Dutch reality TV show called Big Brother, where you put these people in a house and then you have someone watching over them, and the audience gets to choose who they want to stay in the house and who they want to evict. And we have that show in 7 languages now. So it's immensely popular, even though a lot of people like to diss it and call it trash.
Same here.
To your mind, what are the few components, or what are the few reasons for which there's, reality TV has seen such a phenomenal success?
Yeah, so it's interesting because my book focuses mainly on the US, right? But reality TV really is this international phenomenon. It really does, in some ways, transcend culture. And I think part of that is because it oftentimes tells what we call simple stories, right? About protagonists, and then there's the kind of enemy or the antagonist, the mean person who maybe we get justice for them in the end. Or there's a redemption arc where they start out being mean, but in the end, they're redeemed. So a lot of these shows tell these kind of simple stories that really transcend kind of any culture. Anyone in any culture can kind of relate to these little stories. But also, I think there are a few reasons people tune into reality TV. One is these kind of simple stories that are kind of easy to process, and we feel like we get justice in the end. The other is they often traffic in these kind of broad archetypes of characters, right? So there's the mean one and the smart one and the pretty one. So whoever's viewing, you can sort of grab onto one character and say, I'm most like that person, or I identify with Bethany, or I identify with Carol. So there's sort of always someone you can sort of relate to, even if they're a little wackier than you are. But then there's also the voyeurism reason. So people it's a train wreck idea, right? So you're watching that train wreck to remind yourself that even though you might be messed up in your own ways, you're not like those people over there on that reality show. So you kind of feel a sense of superiority while you're watching. So it depends on the show, right? People tune into different shows for different reasons.
So if I was to ask you about your favorite show.
Oh, my favorite show. So my favorite show.
What are the key reasons why you think it really succeeded? Whether it's a particular character that was a big hit or a sort of a storyline.
Yeah, so I always say my favorite show is RuPaul's Drag Race, which is a show about drag queens. Yeah, and I think it's interesting because
just for our listeners.
Yeah, so it's like men who dress up, for the most part, men who dress up as women for kind of entertainment value, and they lip sync and they put on shows and they have like big hair and big dresses and faces full of makeup. And so that's what drag queen is. So it's about these usually cisgendered, usually men who are dressing up as women for entertainment. And I think there are a lot of reasons why that show has succeeded. One of which is there's a lot of conflict. I know you want to talk about conflict, right, on reality TV. There's just a lot of conflict on the show. But also I just think I tune into that show because it teaches me I don't know anything about drag queens before I started watching RuPaul's Drag Race. So everything I know about drag queens, I know from that show. And I just find it so informative in a lot of ways. And I think people kind of overlook that about reality TV sometimes, and they focus on the problematic aspects of reality TV, which there absolutely are a lot of problematic aspects of reality TV. But reality TV can also be used as a teaching tool if we know where to look.
That's interesting because informative and reality TV is not something that most people want.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's quite. And during the writing of your book and your research, did you speak to a lot of makers, people, producers or writers on reality TV shows?
No, it's interesting because I sort of looked at it like I do in my class just as a text. So I just sort of looked at the shows and then what those dynamics can teach us about our lives. But since publishing the book, I've had the chance to talk to a lot of people who are involved in reality TV production, which has been really interesting. So I haven't looked as much into sort of the processes by which these shows get reproduced. I'm just sort of looking at the shows and the action on the shows and saying, okay, what can that teach us about contemporary American society?
I'm asking that because I was just wondering that, we do know that a lot of these shows can be scripted, or if not scripted, there's a lot of kind of, a lot of production that goes behind making these shows. And that's a sort of a sense of, in the way you pick your characters or how you want the story to develop, or, how you want to push a certain character to behave in a certain way. So there's a lot of kind of method to the madness, so to speak. So what I was keen on knowing actually was, to your mind, and this could be from what you've studied of reality TV or people who worked in that industry, what are the key emotions that a reality TV show elicits in people, which makes it a hit or makes it click with people? Are there some certain key emotions that a good reality TV show needs to elicit in people?
Yeah. So first of all, I do want to say, obviously this is not 100% reality, right? I don't think anyone at this point watching reality TV thinks this is just like a documentary of people's lives, right? Of course, like there's some scripting going on. There's certain people are chosen and they're manipulated in various ways, and the footage is edited. Absolutely. I think that's true. At the same time, nothing that we create as a cultural product is ever a complete mirror of reality, right? Even newscasts, they're picking what stories to tell and how to tell them. Even if they're not trying to be biased, it's still not a complete mirror of reality. So I think it's important to note that about reality TV, that yes, absolutely, even though it's not just a mirror, even though it's not 100% really real, it can still teach us about ourselves. But I think, what does it need to evoke in a viewer to be successful? I think one of the things is studies show that what I talked about previously is this kind of train wreck effect, where you can watch it and feel kind of a smug sense of superiority because I'm better. I might have my own issues, but I'm better than those people over there who are doing those wacky reality shows. And I think for a lot of shows, that's sort of an element of their success.
The train wreck
effect, yeah.
At least I'm not a train wreck like that.
But at the same time, it's kind of a paradox because we're still like grabbing onto those characters and identifying with those characters, even though we see them as train wrecks in some ways.
And really invested in them sometimes. Really want to follow the show to know what happens to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And even, after the show, following up on social media, seeing how they're doing. Right, exactly.
Whole other influencer ecosystem, which is basically reality TV stars who then, venture out of the show and just become really big influencers or stars in their own right. So there's that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so there's like a lot of media research about how we form what are called parasocial relationships with the people we see on TV. So we kind of feel like we know them, that we're friends with them. But on reality TV, there's some evidence that it's even more so because we're not seeing people who are supposed to be characters. We're watching like Kim Kardashian as herself, supposedly. Right? And so we feel an even stronger attachment to her. And then we can follow her even off the show, right? We can buy the things she's selling. We can follow her on social media. We can tweet at her. So that's even reinforcing this parasocial bond that we feel with these stars.
One of the important components of reality TV is conflict. And, just to give you an example of the most popular show in India, which is The Big Boss, which I don't really watch, but I know that it's hugely popular. And, you have actors going in it. It's basically a house where participants go in and then you see their life, in that particular time. And the reason why it seems to be a huge hit is also because there's a lot of conflict in the show, sometimes even physical fights, or someone throwing a glass of water at someone, or someone abusing someone, or getting really personal, or behaving in a way that you wouldn't really behave in normal life, in the sense the exaggerated kind of like what you said, a really exaggerated sense of how you would. So if say you don't like someone in real life, you're unlikely to go up to them and throw a glass of water at their face just because you had an argument. But you see that on reality TV, and that seems to really sell the idea of conflict. So why is conflict so central? And why is it such an essential recipe of good hit reality TV show?
Yeah, so it's really kind of nuanced, right? Because on one hand, part of this is this train wreck thing, right? Where you're like, well, like I might have my issues, but I'm not pulling anybody's hair, or I'm not throwing water on anybody's face, right? I'm not throwing a glass at anybody. So, I can feel superior. I'm not like those people over there. The other thing is, there's some evidence that reality TV allows us to experience a kind of a hyper reality. So we identify with the people on the shows, but the people on the shows are oftentimes in situations that we would never get to experience in our own lives. So there's some sense that, we can live vicariously through others who can kind of get away with throwing water on people or pulling, like in our own lives, it might be, that coworker that we don't like, that we would never be able to throw water on or pull their hair, even though we might want to, right? But we can experience that vicariously on reality TV where people are doing those things. So it allows us to be in these kind of imaginative scenarios where, like, the conflict that we might want to engage in our own lives, the people are actually doing.
But why is conflict such a central part of it? Because if it's just a question of you wanting to do something that you can't in real life, you could also you could want to see a love story which you wouldn't see in real life, or you could want to say a sort of a friendship that you wouldn't strike in real life. Why is it that conflict becomes central, that that becomes something that you really want to watch, rather than say like a really beautiful relationship that you may not have in real life, or a lovely equation with a parent that you may not have in your life, just to give you an example.
I think reality TV does offer us those things, right? Like a show like The Bachelor is supposed to be all about romance, right? And they get to ride in like hot air balloons over like Tuscany, and you might never experience that in real life, so you're living vicariously. So I do think it does those things, but you're right. It does seem like conflict, it's not all reality TV, but there's certainly a type of reality TV where conflict is really a key element. And I think part of it is that vicariousness, but I think also just if there's not enough conflict, people see it as boring.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes people complain about there being too much there kind of needs to be a sweet spot, right? Where like it's not conflict all the time, right? It's not just like 21 minutes of just nonstop conflict, but you kind of need to have like enough conflict in there to keep it interesting, or else it bores people. So I think that's part of it.
And I think one of the interesting things for us, especially at Newslaundry, because we critique a lot of the television media, how we look at what's happening in the news media ecosystem, there seems to be a lot of spillover effect of reality TV onto news. And I don't know if that is the case in the US too, but perhaps maybe with cable news. But you have a lot of television news debates or news channels that really follow the reality TV format, where you have panelists which are almost similar. The same panelists come over and over again to talk about the same things, different topics, and you have an anchor that would kind of engineer a conflict. And a lot of the debates and discussions around politics, around some of the hot news issues, are kind of being modeled around this reality TV model, where you have people really go at each other because they come from different ideologies or because they have a different opinion on a particular news event. Do you see that spillover effect in the US too? And what do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not as much as what you're describing, but certainly true. And I think, I start off the book by defining just what reality TV is. And I specifically say it's different from news. I wouldn't consider news to be reality TV because news supposedly is primarily about educating and reality TV is primarily about entertainment. But of course, right, those two things are getting really muddy and intertwined because, of course, the news, they want you to keep tuning in. So they're trying to entertain you to some extent, right? And so I think what you're describing is just like the logical extension of that, where, people are so primed from all of these years of watching reality TV and other forms of TV that even with their news, they want a little like action there. They want to see a little bit of conflict. So I definitely think those two things are intertwined and getting more intertwined, though maybe not in the US to the extent that you're describing in India.
You wouldn't see, okay, that's interesting. Not even like a Fox?
Yeah, I think that's a whole other thing, right? The idea of that's certainly a more like entertainment-based news program. Yeah, I mean, I definitely see it. We definitely see it. We definitely see that kind of intertwining of news media and this like sort of reality TV style entertainment. It's definitely there. For sure. Yeah, and I would say in a Fox, right? And of course, there are politicians who absolutely draw on the conventions of reality TV, in their campaigns and even when they're in office, for sure, in the US.
And what could that be when you say the conventions of reality TV, politicians following it? What are
Yeah, so someone like, say, Donald Trump, I think a lot of his success, was rooted in using, and he comes from, for those who don't know, he comes from a reality TV background. He was on a reality TV show called The Apprentice for many years. That's how a lot of Americans kind of got to know him, as this archetype. But yeah, so even, in his campaign, his subsequent presidency, he like played with a lot of the devices of reality TV. So even like the cliffhanger where it's, tune in later and I'll tell you who my Supreme Court justice pick is, right? Or I'm not going to tell you this thing until prime time, so get all your cameras ready at prime time, and then I'll make this big announcement, right? So this cliffhanger thing. He played with these kind of archetypes, talking about people using these broad categories like the nasty woman or the bad hombre. So using these archetypal categories, and even played with our sense of, what is reality and what's not. Which again, reality TV has kind of, because we're all kind of watching reality TV skeptically at this point, right? Like hardly anyone's watching and saying, yes, that's 100% a mirror of reality. But now we're also consuming news media kind of in that way. And he's kind of taught us to be a little bit more skeptical about the images that we see on our screens, which I think in some ways can be good. We should be skeptical of the media that we're consuming. But he kind of brought it to a place where anything could be questioned, right? Like a photo showing the size of his inauguration crowd. Just a photo. Nope, that's doctored. That's wrong. That's not reality, he would say. So he drew on that sort of skepticism that we had backed by years of watching reality TV. So I think a politician like Trump, this is what I mean when I say he's sort of able to use the kind of conventions of reality TV to his benefit.
That's quite interesting too. To use the skepticism that we've developed as society because of years of watching reality TV, you can actually turn it and weaponize it. It's quite an interesting. And I think you should definitely look at Indian TV news as your research. I don't know.
Sounds fascinating.
Because, we've had at least one person from the news make it to reality TV, like a person who's on the news all the time, like a frequent panelist of sorts, a talking head of sorts of debates, who went to reality TV, and one reality TV contestant who then made it as a talking head in television news. So it's quite interesting.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that cross. And I think, again, like the aim probably is, again, like you said, to compete with entertainment channels, because at the end of the day, you want eyeballs. And there's this clear format that entertainment has given you, which is actually very suited for news, because it's real in a sense. What would you say? Now, you said that you've written the book as a fan, and that there are positives to it. So you're not someone who really looks down at the genre. What are some of the positive things to your mind of reality TV, whether it's a cultural impact or a change in society or just a different way of looking at things? How would you evaluate the positives of reality TV shows?
Yeah, I mean, so first, I just want to be clear. I absolutely think reality TV is problematic in a lot of ways. So even though I come from a place of being a fan, there are shows that I won't personally watch, and I also would understand why other people wouldn't want to watch the genre. So I'm not sort of coming in and saying you must tune in to reality TV. I don't have any stock in Viacom. I have no stake in whether you watch reality TV or not. I think you need to pay attention to reality TV is what I would argue, because at the end of the day, it is this huge cultural phenomenon. And when something is this large, you need to stop and take a look and say, well, where is this coming from? And what can this teach us? But I do think there are some positives to reality TV. Reality TV historically has been more diverse than other forms of media. So you see people in groups that you don't necessarily always see on scripted TV. Like in the United States, people of color, gay people, LGBT people in the United States have been more kind of prominent on reality TV than they have in other forms of media. And sometimes that's because they're being portrayed really stereotypically, which is really problematic. But I think there's something to be said just for representation. And reality TV often shows us groups, even the show RuPaul's Drag Race, right? This is a whole show about drag queens that has become wildly popular because of reality TV, this really kind of marginalized group of gay men who dress in women's clothing for entertainment has been given this platform. So I think reality TV historically has been able to give platforms to groups of people that other forms of media haven't necessarily. So that's one of the positives.
But do you think it's largely cements prejudices in people, the notions that they may have about people of color or people from the LGBTQ community, or do you think it can shatter your notions that you've had about people that you would not have seen on popular culture or you haven't interacted with?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both, right? I think absolutely there are a lot of stereotypes that are being promoted on reality TV that are going to cement if you're prejudiced, right? Which most people are to some extent, it's going to cement those prejudices absolutely about women, about people of color, about gay people, for sure. And I don't shy away from that in the book. It's absolutely problematic in those ways. But I think sometimes even just introducing you to people who you may not have otherwise encountered can be useful and helpful. Like even going back to the early days of the MTV show, The Real World, which some people say is like the first reality show. There's debate about that, but this is like the early 1990s, early to mid 1990s. And there was a person on The Real World in one of the first seasons who was a gay man and he was living with AIDS. And for a lot of Americans, that was like the first gay person that they had gotten to know, to form this parasocial relationship with. And you saw him as a whole person. This guy, Pedro, you saw him as a whole person. He wasn't just this stereotype. He was a person. He had foibles. He had a partner, right? He had conflicts with his roommate. You saw him as this whole person. And I think that really was ultimately a positive for the LGBT community, that people were just exposed to this person that they might not have otherwise been exposed to.
Okay. And what are the negatives? What do you see as like a far-reaching negative impact on the society, which is pretty hooked to reality TV?
Yeah, so again, it is the promotion of these kinds of stereotypes, right? Stereotypes about women, about people of color, there are stereotypes about gay. I mean, pretty much almost every group is stereotyped, maybe other than white men, on reality TV. And so it does promote those like prior understandings that people have that can be really dangerous. I think like there was a show, there was a study that looked at the show The Biggest Loser, which is like this weight loss show. And it showed that people who were exposed, who watched an episode of The Biggest Loser versus just watching like an episode of a nature show, the people who watched The Biggest Loser came away with a significantly greater dislike of fat people. And so you see how even just watching one episode of this show can kind of alter people's perceptions and reinforce their prejudices. So reality TV can be really dangerous in that way. And I don't think we should shy away from discussing that, but I don't think that's the whole story about reality TV either.
Your example on Donald Trump is pretty interesting because I think a lot of populist leaders or authoritarians across the world want to use a bit from that playbook of, putting out a version of themselves which is dramatized. And you see that with news in India for sure. But what does it mean? So I have two questions actually. One is that for a population this becomes the most popular entertainment mode for people, watching other people. There is this expectation of drama. There's this expectation of being entertained. There is also this expectation, like we talked about conflict earlier, of being sort of abrasive. It's a sort of a genre that celebrates abrasiveness, that celebrates sometimes being, uncouth or saying things that you wouldn't usually say. What does that do for our discourse and politics in a country? Because that's the expectation that you have from your entertainment. And when you keep seeing that, that's probably an expectation you have from your politicians. And you start to like elected leaders who probably behave like reality TV show participants.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to note that there's always been sort of like an intertwining of entertainment and politics. That's not necessarily totally new with reality TV, especially in the US, going back even to like the 1970s. Richard Nixon was on this show called Laugh-In, this variety show. Bill Clinton was playing his saxophone on the Arsenio Hall show. So, I mean, I think there's always been a little bit of that intertwining, right? Or even the way that like Princess Diana's death was covered, or the O.J. Simpson trial was covered. And this sort of edutainment, right? Like this intertwining of news and sort of, entertainment. I do think you're right. I think that reality TV has kind of hyped that up a lot. So now like the expectation, and I don't know how much of that we can lay at reality TV's feet and say the reality TV is fully responsible for this, right? Other than like versus other shifts in the culture. But certainly with the rise of reality TV, absolutely, we've seen this sort of expectation that news is going to be kind of more snappy, more entertaining, maybe more conflict driven, and that, the way that our politicians present themselves, especially in recent years, especially with the rise of Donald Trump in the United States, right? It's going to be more it's going to be a show when you tune in to these debates. Absolutely. And, as a sociologist, I have to say, like, we don't scientifically know that one leads to the other. Correlation is not causation, but I think it's reasonable to believe that reality TV had a hand in that for sure. Especially with someone like Donald Trump, where he clearly comes from a reality TV background and is using that to his benefit.
But do you think we're firmly in the age of reality TV in the sense our politics or the kind of people who are going to rise to power or the kind of people who are going to have some sway with voters will have to fit into that trope of drama, of being a personality? And it's not just Trump, like leaders across.
He's the most obvious example, but yeah, you're right. Yeah,
like you said, he has a history. He comes from a background of reality TV. But do you think that is just how it's going to be for any leader who wants success, or for any politician who wants to be elected or wants to be noticed with the media and of course with the voters later on? They will have to follow certain tropes. So in that sense, it's kind of the age of reality TV shows and the age of reality TV in politics.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think that's really problematic because a lot of the tropes in reality TV about people who are not white men are negative tropes. So then people would have to fit into those negative tropes if we're following that, about women, about people of color, right? I think there's always been a sense, though, about politicians that they kind of need to not be boring, which is interesting because, like, at the end of the day, really, who cares if they're boring as long as they're able to do their job? But I think that was sort of a critique that was lobbed at someone like Hillary Clinton, where, oh, she just doesn't excite me as a candidate. She's not someone that I want to go get a beer with. She doesn't seem interesting to me. You heard people say things like that, right? So I feel like there is that sense. And I don't know how much of that is due to reality TV and how much of it has kind of always been there, but there is that sense that, like, you have to bring a little something more interesting than just, having good policies.
Some of it could also be social media, because it's not just reality TV. We're also consuming a lot of social media, which again...
Oh, for sure. And they're intertwined too, right? Social media. And then, of course, these like mini reality shows, TikTok and YouTube, right? And all of those things, right?
Absolutely. Now, I wanted to ask you, since you recognize the fact that reality TV can sometimes affect positive change, it can change our notions about people, it can open our eyes to a reality of another person that we may not have been exposed to earlier. What are the things you'd like to change about what you see in reality TV shows today? If you were given a show of your own, or if you had a say in consulting with all these production companies or these shows, how would you like to, shape reality TV, so to speak?
Oh, that's such a good question. How would I shape reality TV? So many ways. I think I would be very wary about, who I cast and how I'm editing them, and to what extent does that fit into our stereotypes about the group that they're a part of, right? So if I'm casting a Black woman, am I casting for a specific type, and am I editing this in a particular way to make her seem angry, because that's like a stereotype, the angry Black woman or the angry Black man, right? Or, the woman who's just overly emotional, or the like zany, campy gay guy. Am I casting and editing to fit into those particular categories? And I would kind of actively push back against that. And a show like RuPaul's Drag Race, I think in some ways does reinforce those categories, because in some ways the people on it are a little bit stereotypical. But at the end of the day, it's also really pushing back against those categories, because you have these like gay men who are gay men who like to dress in women's clothing, who are given this amazing platform. So if I were in charge, go ahead.
I just want to cut in 1 minute. I just want to know, what is the format of the show that you spoke of?
RuPaul's Drag Race? Yeah. So
you have these men who dress up as women, drag queens.
Yeah, I mean, that's really oversimplifying, because they don't all identify as men, and they don't all, but for like the most part. Okay. So they're all drag queens, and then they compete. There's a host, RuPaul, who's this famous drag queen, and they compete in these challenges related to being a drag queen. And then in the end of each show, 2 people are in the bottom, and they have to lip sync for their life. So they're given a song, lip sync, they have to lip sync to, right? And so they both lip sync, and then RuPaul decides who does the better lip sync and keeps them in. The other person has to leave the show. And, in the end, a winner is chosen.
That they're given, like, could you give us an example of the sort of challenges that they're asked to do?
The challenges that they're asked to do. Oh yeah, so one of them we actually just watched in my class the other day. They had a bunch of straight male athletes come in, and the drag queens had to transform these guys into drag queens. Oh. And whoever did the best, and then do like a performance with them, and whoever did the best job was the winner, and the people who didn't do so great were in the bottom and had to lip sync. So that was an example of a challenge. Or they do photo shoot challenges or entertainment challenges, things like that. I find it highly entertaining.
Normalizes it also for people who may look down at this, or people who don't know of drag queens in real life. So it kind of also makes it normal.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Even among my students, who I tend to think are very like young and savvy, I often ask, like, have you ever heard of a drag queen? And a few say they haven't ever heard of a drag queen. So that's their like first introduction to what a drag queen is. So it's interesting.
But you were talking about what you changed. So you said choosing and not fitting them into a particular stereotype, or not using them to cement the prejudices that we may have about a particular group of people.
Yeah, I would just be really wary about my casting decisions and editing decisions. And I mean, I think it would be really interesting to have a reality show where it didn't really reinforce any of those prejudices and stereotypes.
But do you think that would work if you had one?
I think it would. I think, people say like, is that just our prejudices and stereotypes? Is that just like the lifeblood of reality TV? And if you took those away, there would be no, and I don't think that's true. I mean, like you said, it's conflict, right? I think one of the reasons people like reality TV is a kind of dark reason in that it reinforces our stereotypes. It makes us kind of feel better and more superior about ourselves, especially like middle class, straight, white people, right? But at the end of the day, I think if there's conflict, right? If people are being portrayed in an interesting way, if they're in imaginative scenarios, I think it can still work. I don't think you have to have those stereotypes in order for reality TV to function.
Great. My last question to you: what do you think is the next level from reality TV? Do you think like this genre is just going to be around and it's going to be popular, or do you think there's going to be like this next hyper reality TV show or a format?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I think people say, well, is reality TV waning? I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. I think almost half of all TV produced in the United States is reality TV at this point, right? So I think it's really going to be around for a long time. And I think, of course, we have these kind of new little reality shows, the TikTok and the YouTube, right? And the social media and those kinds of clips that we're watching. It seems like as of now, that hasn't replaced just reality TV as we know it, watching the episodic shows on TV. Maybe one day it will, and it'll kind of move in that direction. But I think reality TV is kind of like a chameleon, and it kind of changes, I guess not a chameleon, what's the word? It changes shape in response to new technologies. I think it's going to incorporate whatever the new technologies are. Someone suggested the other day, maybe there'll be a show that's just robots, like a reality show about robots or AI, right? So I think, as it's always done, it's responded to cultural politics, it's responded to new technologies, and it's continued to change shape. And I think it's going to continue to do that, even though people are also doing these other little forms of reality TV. I really don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. Can I ask you a question? Is it okay if I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Have you seen, I would love to get your thoughts on Indian Matchmaking, the show. Have you seen it?
Yeah, Seema Taparia, the matchmaker. So I'm one of those people who just cringed at the first episode and I was like, okay, I can't watch it.
So I can't watch anymore.
But I know a lot of friends who really loved it. What did you think of it?
I think, the second season just started, and a lot of people want to talk about that show, like when I give talks for some reason, and I would just love to get your opinion about it as someone, sort of coming from an Indian context. I mean, I don't think it, much like the shows in the US, I don't think that show is like a reflection of Indian culture, really. I mean, it's not a mirror, right?
Arranged marriages are a big thing in India, and they've evolved. From the point from my grandparents' time where you wouldn't really see who you're marrying. It was just families deciding, to a point now where parents have become these match fixers of sorts. So, you meet people through your parents, but you kind of go on dates, you have a courtship. And so that aspect is true. Arranged marriages are pretty big in India. But her world is really arranged marriages for like hyper rich people, right? Like really the elite and the rich.
Right.
And there are these, I think I completely got turned off when I think it was the first episode where they start making lists of, she's talking about the women that she wants to show to one of the guys. And he's basically saying that I don't want a short girl. And then he gives a cutoff height that she should be as tall as this or whatever. So I got completely turned off that. But I think it's also, I have to see the show, so I can't really comment too much on it. But people love it mostly because the matchmaker is quite cringy. She's also like...
Yeah.
She's also like this woman who, she's like this mean aunt you have.
Yeah.
Tell you to your face that
she is that archetype. Absolutely.
You're not successful enough. So you shouldn't want someone who's rich or handsome or, whatever. So she's like this mean aunt. And I think everyone in India has had that in their family where, you could have a very mean relative who tells you that you're never going to get married because you're like this, or that, do this, otherwise you're not going to get married. So
people in India are watching the show and are into the show. Okay.
So that way it's pretty interesting, but I found it quite cringy.
Yeah. Okay. So that's really interesting. I love that idea. Yeah, that archetype of the mean. I don't think that's unique to India. I think we kind of all have that, right?
Yeah.
I think that transcends culture, that one relative, right?
And then of course, from what I've seen of the first two episodes, the man who just wants this perfect wife. Again, that's a very kind of a true stereotype in India where men want, they could do whatever they want in their lives. They could look however, or they could do whatever work, or they could come from wherever. But the woman has to fit into this perfect, she should be fair, she should be educated, but not too opinionated. She should, be independent, and she should work, but she should also be a family woman. So, these demands that are made out of women in a very patriarchal society where the man could basically be whatever, but the woman has to fit into these perfect boxes. So I think that's probably something that resonated with a lot of women, that, okay, this is something that we have to suffer all the time.
But I think there's interesting because there's also that cultural conflict where, like, yeah, you do have men who are like that, but then the women are like, we're not going to play along with that. Like, I want a career, right? Yeah. So you sort of see like how that's coming into conflict, which is interesting.
That must be very cathartic for a lot of women to watch. That she's giving it back, or she's kind of saying, I'm not going to, I don't want this guy because he wants this and this from me. So
right, yeah. Oh, interesting.
I should watch it. But I watch a lot of Indian television news, which is reality TV. I mean, you have to watch it. It's really sad for, news, and it's really sad for democracy, what news has been reduced to. But I think a lot of and this is true also for English television news, you have a lot of sort of primetime debates on major issues, which are completely scripted battles. So, there's going to be this one person who's going to talk about everything from economy to, world peace, to terrorism, to national security, to climate change, and will come every day. And, exactly the position that person is going to take. And then you have a person on the other side who's going to do the same thing. And it's basically a match between these two people. So like an ideological contest in a very reality TV-esque way. So
yeah, I think that's interesting. I think, and especially in US culture too, there's this idea, I think now, that there are two sides to everything, right? Like even something that's just an empirical fact, like climate change, right? So you have someone, they're debating it, right? Like you have someone coming in and saying like, this is what's happening. And then someone else is going to say like, I don't believe that that's really happening, often based on no data whatsoever. But I think that has sort of seen an increase, this idea that like, reality is up for debate, right? Like anything is up for debate, even something that can be kind of proven through scientific fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, we should, hopefully we can do this next year in person. We'd love to have you here in India and maybe have a chat on this.
Sounds great.
Maybe at the next Media Rumble. But thank you so much, Danielle, for taking out the time. And I'd love to attend your class. It seems like
you're welcome anytime. Thank you for having me.
Maybe you can have an Indian matchmaking class, and then I could have something to say.
I should. All right. Thank you.
Class?
What?
You have Indian students in your class? Indian origin?
Do I have any this year? No. I recently gave a talk, though, about the book, and there was an Indian American graduate student at that university who was asking me questions about Indian matchmaking. So now I have more context to discuss it.
Thank you so much. Have a really good evening.
Thanks, you too.
That was the online session of the Media Rumble. I hope you enjoyed our conversations. Mark your calendar for the 14th and the 15th of October, where we can meet offline in real time at the Media Rumble. It's going to be at the IHC at New Delhi. You can register online. The link will be with this episode.